Today we are going to look at George Washington's farewell address. After 2 terms as president, Washington was tired of the burdens of the presidency and attacks from his political enemies. With the help of Alexander Hamilton and James Madison, Washington wrote a farewell address which was first published in the Philadelphia Daily American Advertiser and then in newspapers across the country. In his address, he announced his retirement and thanked the people of the United States for their trust in him and the honors they had bestowed on him. Then, on a more serious note, he wrote, "Here, perhaps, I ought to stop. But a solicitude for your welfare, which cannot end but with my life, and the apprehension of danger natural to that solicitude, urge me to offer to your solemn contemplation and to recommend to your frequent review some sentiments which are the result of much reflection, of no inconsiderable observation, and which appear to me all important to the permanency of your felicity as a people." In other words, Washington says that he can't just say goodbye without sharing some concerns that he has for the welfare of the country. After a lot of thought and reflection, he felt that it was appropriate to offer some advice that he thought would add to the permanent happiness of the people of the United States. It is interesting to look back at this document after over 200 years because it was written by the one man who more than any other had led this nation to its freedom from Great Britain and the establishment of a new form of government. Even in his own lifetime, he was known as the father of his country. What words of advice would he have for the citizens of the United States? As you listen to this presentation and read through his farewell address, ask yourself this question: does his advice still hold any relevance in today's world? Let's take a look at some of the key issues that Washington brought up in his farewell address. Washington begins his advice by emphasizing the importance of unity of government, which, he writes, is a main pillar in the edifice of your real independence, the support of your tranquility at home, your peace abroad, of your safety, of your prosperity, of that very liberty which you so highly prize. It is of infinite moment that you should properly estimate the immense value of your national union to your collective and individual happiness. Under the Constitution, the states had been brought together under a strong federal government. This national government was a source of pride for Washington. He wrote, "The name of American, which belongs to you in your national capacity, must always exalt the just pride of patriotism more than any appellation derived from local discriminations." In other words, Washington believed that being an American was more important than being a member of any individual state. It was time for the people to see themselves as Americans and to take pride in that fact. While there were many differences between the states, and these differences were real, Washington pointed out that there were far more reasons for unity. He writes, "With slight shades of difference, you have the same religion, manners, habits, and political principles. You have in common cause fought and triumphed together. The independence and liberty you possess are the work of joint councils and joint efforts." Beyond these similarities, Washington believed that there were even more commanding reasons to guard and preserve the Union. For example, all the states benefited from the strengths and weaknesses among the various sections of the country, north and south, east and west. This diversity made all the states dependent upon one another for their mutual protection and growing prosperity. In addition, he points out that the National Union had made it possible to negotiate treaties with Great Britain and Spain. These treaties encouraged westward expansion and prosperity in the western states. This idea of unity was so important to Washington that he questioned the patriotism of anyone who attempted to weaken the bands of unity. Finally, Washington argues that the Constitution of the United States itself was a reason for unity. All the states had, after careful consideration, voluntarily adopted the Constitution. The fact that the powers of the government were distributed among the three branches of government provided protection for the states and individual freedoms. Even within the document itself, provision was made for amending it if necessary. Therefore, Washington concludes that the Constitution deserves your full confidence and support, as well as your obedience to the established government. When Washington first took office, there were no established political parties. However, by the time he left office, two political parties had emerged, the Federalists and the Democratic Republicans. As Washington observed these two parties, he realized that political parties and factions could eventually pose a threat to the Union. He believed that political parties could be the platform by which cunning, ambitious, and unprincipled men will be enabled to subvert the power of the people and to usurp for themselves the reins of government. The third major point in Washington's address is the importance of religion and morality to the nation. He writes, of all the dispositions and habits which lead to political prosperity, religion and morality are indispensable supports. Unlike politicians today who scream the mantra of separation in church and state, neither Washington nor the vast majority of our founders would have understood this phrase to mean banning religion from the public square. In fact, Washington questions the patriotism of any man who should labor to subvert these great pillars of human happiness. The next major point in this address is the subject of the national debt. Washington believed that financial stability was a very important source of strength and security. He believed that we should avoid unnecessary expenses and pay off our debts as quickly as possible to avoid putting this burden on our children. Washington reminded his fellow citizens that in order to pay off these debts, they should cooperate by paying the necessary taxes to raise revenue. The last major issue that Washington deals with is foreign affairs. His basic advice is to observe good faith and justice towards all nations, cultivate peace and harmony with all. He goes on, however, to warn against getting involved in permanent alliances with other nations and to avoid getting involved in European affairs. He writes that we should take advantage of being geographically separated from Europe so that we can remain neutral in their conflicts. Our primary interactions with other nations should be to establish stable trade relationships. As Washington concludes his address, he admits that one of his motives for his advice regarding neutrality was to give our country time to settle and mature its yet recent institutions, and to progress to the point where we are, humanly speaking, in control of our own fortunes. Washington had given 45 years of his life to the service of this country, and he hoped that any faults of incompetent abilities will be consigned to oblivion, as myself must soon be to the mansions of rest. He ends his message to the people by confiding that he is looking forward to retirement and enjoying, along with the rest of his fellow citizens, the influence of good laws under a free government.